and welcome to January 2023's episode of Wildlife Wednesday Monthly Roundup. I'm Tenley Thompson.
And I'm Tyler Greenlee.
And it's our best of 2022 videos episode. So we're going to show you all the best moments from Wildlife Wednesday from 2022. But before we get started on that, we wanted to talk a little bit about this crazy viral video that's been going around. I'll let Tyler take it away on that.
Yeah, so some of our guides recently posted a video of a black wolf chasing an elk through Grand Teton National Park. And this video has kind of exploded across the news networks, and we would love to share it with you. We're going to show you the video right now in case you haven't seen it. Here it is, a black wolf. We believe this wolf is from the Wildcat Ridge Pack, which is a resident pack, or was a resident pack, in Grand Teton National Park. And you can see here this wolf is pursuing a female elk right across the highway, which is pretty insane. This actually happened on tour, and so was something our guests were able to see while out in the field. Pretty amazing. This is like winning the lottery as far as wildlife sightings on a wildlife tour in Grand Teton National Park. This is something you see usually in Yellowstone, so very unusual and exciting. Like
being out on just a casual evening tour
with
our guide Bo Weldon, who took that footage and has become very internet famous in the last 2 weeks, and just sort of casually driving along and be like, oh, look, there's a wolf hunting an elk. That would be really, really neat. So it has been featured, all over the internet. What's surprising to us in some ways is that this video, it was not taken yesterday. It was taken this last year, and then all of a sudden became viral. So we give up on trying to understand what sort of when and how things become popular around here. We don't really quite get it.
Makes no sense to us.
But let's see. USA Today, Yahoo News, Huffington Post.
Unofficial network.
Yeah.
Or news network.
Vigor Times. There's a whole bunch of them. So if you see this video floating around, congrats to Bo Weldon for capturing such a great video on tour. But we wanted to share you that we've gone viral.
It's such a cool video because he actually captured it with his cell phone, which is, even more impressive.
Because that's what you have. Right?
Yeah, just
snap it up.
Yeah, film it while you can. That's awesome.
But back to our best videos of 2022, which definitely that one is one. Just we didn't expect that to go so big so fast.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead. We'll get started, I think, with a bang. Let's see. Let's go to Laura, who talks a lot about Old Faithful in this video. Its history and how we look at it today.
Hey, this is Laura. Welcome to the beautiful and historic Old Faithful Inn here up in Yellowstone National Park. The architect of the Old Faithful Inn was a young man named Robert Reamer. Reamer was originally from a small town in Ohio. Reamer left home at the very young age of 13 to start a new life in sunny San Diego, California, where he met some very important people. He met Charles Mellon, who was the president of the Northern Pacific Railroad Company, who gave Reamer the job working in Yellowstone National Park to construct the Old Faithful Inn and a new train depot up in Gardner, Montana. There has never been a railroad line that entered Yellowstone National Park, not back then and not nowadays. The Northern Pacific Railroad Company wanted to sell more train tickets and marketed the area as a wonderland, persuaded people to come see it, but that meant having infrastructure once the guests arrived. They built hotels within the national park, as well as stagecoach roads, so that guests could get off the rail and onto a stagecoach and go bumping down the dusty trail from hotel to hotel. Back then, a ticket price was just $50 and included all food, lodging, accommodations, and travel for 5.5 days. Reamer was not necessarily famous at the time for his prior work. He was only 29 years old when he first constructed the Old Faithful Inn. So I think he had some experience, but not a ton in other places at that point. But he was in the right place at the right time and willing to head out to Yellowstone, a very cold, snowy place, over the winter of 1903 into 1904, when the Old Faithful Inn first opened for business. Come up the stairs with me, down the red carpet, and through the big red doors of the inn. Back in the old days, visitors would have found the door
Oh dear. I think that video blacked out on us. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we've had a lot of difficulty with this video in the past. We're not sure what is going on, but we would eventually at some point really love to share it with you all because we were just talking, we want to show it to our new guides because it's such a great video.
We think it would make a great video to actually train our new people, we were just saying. So I'm sorry you missed the rest of it. We will try and put it up on social this week as its own standalone thing. Everybody can check it out because it really is a great history.
It's super educational. I mean, I would encourage everyone to watch it. So sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry, Laura, your video failed again, but that's all right. In the meantime, let's go on to the next thing here, which actually is pretty cool. This next video was shot and made by Tyler himself.
Yeah, so this is a really, really special video to me. It's different than our other ones because it is a quiet video and you guys can all just sit back and relax and enjoy it. I shot it back in August and it is 6:10, having some cool interaction with some wolves. And so I hope you all enjoy it.
So once in a lifetime footage for sure. I was very, very jealous when I heard that Tyler had this experience out in the wilderness all by yourself.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
being there by myself, seeing that.
Yeah.
Always a little nerve-wracking to be around those large carnivores.
From a safe distance, but
From
still.
yes. So
Yeah.
just so everyone knows, all that footage was shot through a spotting scope, and from a very far away distance. You would never want to be close to any large carnivore on a carcass. So best to keep your distance for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of spotting scopes, we've got a lot to celebrate at Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures for the year 2022.
Yeah.
We had a lot of milestones we passed. We took out 8,000 different guests for the first time this year.
Insane.
Which is just amazing how much the business has grown. We made a new partnership with Swarovski Optic for their binoculars and spotting scopes on tour. So the world's finest binoculars and spotting scopes. We are the very first field partner that Swarovski's ever had.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're maybe going to have a couple, but we're their first. So that was a really big milestone as well. And then, of course, we were locally nominated for 2 awards that we're pretty proud of. Our owner was nominated for Citizen of the Year, Taylor Phillips,
really cool.
by the Chamber of Commerce, and then Jackson Eco Tours Adventures was nominated for Small Business of the Year. So,
That's so exciting.
really, it's pretty amazing to see all of our hard work and efforts to educate the community and really make a difference in our local parks and environment kind of get recognized. It was definitely making us really, really happy. So, okay, let's get back to the videos because we're done singing our praises. But
we're excited.
Let's see. So we were looking at Old Faithful from last July with Laura, and then we had last August with Tyler's video with 610 and the Wolves. Let's go all the way back to last February and look at a brief history of the National Elk Refuge with a video that I made, actually.
Yeah.
Here we go.
For thousands of years, elk herds migrated from what is now Yellowstone and Grand Teton through Jackson Hole on their way to winter ranges in southern Wyoming. As the first homesteads grew in the late 1890s in Jackson Hole, those homesteaders farmed hay on the same land elk had traditionally used on their way south. Elk migration routes were increasingly disrupted by settlers' wire fences, and elk gradually ceased to migrate beyond Jackson Hole. On top of all this, wearing elk jewelry became a fashion item starting in the 1890s. An elk tooth on a watch chain was considered a status symbol. This created a large demand, and elk ivories could cost as much as $100 a pair. One of the molars on the elk is actually made of ivory, a little-known fact that is embodied by their scientific name, Cervus elephas, or in English, the elephant deer. The American elk ivory was a hot commodity, and hunters flooded into northwest Wyoming. They were called tuskers by the locals. Tuskers were poachers and killed elk by the thousands. And it was said that tuskers killed more elk in a single winter than were killed in 10 years of normal hunting. In 1888, there were over 50,000 elk in Jackson Hole. By 1890, migration routes south were all but lost from settlement. Then came the tuskers and the hunting. But the final blow was 4 harsh winters, one in 1889, which killed over 20,000 elk, and then 3 hard winters between 1909 and 1911. Elk were never meant to winter in such difficult conditions as Jackson Hole, but they had nowhere to go. The winter of 1909 was particularly devastating. The winter had begun with heavy snow that drove more than the usual number of elk out of the high country. Wet snow turned to rain, which then froze, making it nearly impossible for the elk to reach food. The elk invaded ranches, haystacks, and the town of Jackson. Desperate, one resident noted in the spring of 1909 that it was possible to walk at least 2 miles, stepping on elk carcasses without ever putting foot on the ground. By 1912, there were less than 10,000 elk left in Jackson Hole. Enter Stephen Leake, a local legend and a man of mixed history. Leake homesteaded in Jackson Hole early on and cared deeply for its elk. While modern accounts largely ignore Leake's mixed past, it's important to note that he particularly blamed the Bannock and Shoshone people who had hunted in the valley for centuries, as well as black buffalo soldiers for overhunting and tusking in Jackson Hole. This was completely untrue. Leake even joined a posse that massacred several Native people in the Bannock War of 1895, which caused them to lose their treaty hunting rights. Despite this, Stephen Leake is largely responsible for publicizing the plight of the elk and is responsible for the foundation of the modern conservation effort to save them. Leake documented the deaths of elk in Jackson Hole and garnered national attention for the problem. His photos were published around the country, and he was known as the father of the elk. The public demanded Congress do something, and Congress responded by giving money to feed the elk and investigate the problem. Then, in 1912, Congress appropriated $50,000 to purchase 1,760 acres north of Jackson, and also to set aside an adjacent 1,000 acres of public land. They also purchased additional hay. At this point, elk occupied only 10% of their original winter range. By feeding these elk through the winter, the federal government could ensure that elk didn't go extinct, while also separating them from the haystacks settlers needed to feed their cattle. Eventually, the elk refuge grew to reach 25,000 acres by 1937. The Jackson elk herd remains one of the largest in the country. Elk in this herd were used to reestablish elk herds throughout North America, and Jackson's elk were used to create herds in 37 states, as well as in Canada and Mexico. Since 1909, elk have been supplementally fed all but 10 winters. Under a plan adopted in 2019, elk feeding has been cut in half and eliminated entirely in average winters. Feeding wildlife is now seen as a big problem. It certainly accelerated the decline of migration routes out of Jackson. Soon after the establishment of the refuge, elk that summered in the nearby high country completely ceased winter migrations, and elk started wintering exclusively in Jackson, and they concentrated near the feed grounds. Today, anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 elk will winter on the National Elk Refuge. Migration is nearly halted. In the 1950s, 25% of the elk population in the elk refuge migrated from Yellowstone. Today, just 2% do. Concentrating elk populations can lead to disease. Chronic wasting disease is an untreatable, easily spread, fatal brain disease that is a big concern and has been detected in Jackson Hole. Brucellosis can spread on a feed ground and be very harmful to the cattle industry. Wyoming Game and Fish Department feels elk populations are too high. Among other issues, overpopulations of elk outcompete mule deer, harm the land, and impact many different species negatively with their abundance. But eliminating feeding could be very harmful to the local cattle industry, as elk would again leave the refuge and quickly eat ranchers' hay that they set aside for cattle. Eliminating feeding could also mean that thousands of elk could die during each of our difficult winters, which likely would not be publicly supported. It is clear, however, that feeding them is doing the population of elk great harm. One thing is clear. The migration routes that elk once used are forever lost. So finding a way to best support wildlife populations and human needs for the landscape continues to be a challenge the elk refuge faces after more than 100 years. And it will always be a challenge in Jackson Hole. In the meantime, seeing the thousands of elk that winter on the open ground north of Jackson will always be a thrill for visitors. And the elk on the elk refuge also protect an entire ecosystem of over 150 bird species and lots of other amazing wildlife. The National Elk Refuge is an early conservation success story that ultimately saved the western Wyoming elk. For Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures, this is Tenley Thompson. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Jackson Hole's National Elk Refuge's history.
Thank you, Tenley, for making us that really beautiful and educational video on the National Elk Refuge. There's such amazing and interesting history behind why the elk go there. And what's really cool is we actually get to tour on the National Elk Refuge, and we see all those elk plus a bunch of other wildlife, including eagles and bighorn sheep and coyotes. And so
sometimes wolves.
And sometimes wolves.
Yeah.
Actually, I believe that people have been seeing wolves on and off the refuge this the past 2 weeks or so,
Yeah.
which is pretty exciting. And so thank you so much, Tenley, for making those videos. And if you ever find yourself in Jackson, you can always come and see the Elk Refuge with us. All right, so up next we have Sarah Ernst talking about pikas from back in June, which is pretty exciting. They're I think, an underappreciated animal that we get to see on tour every now and then. And so here's Sarah Ernst with pikas.
Hello, this is Sarah Ernst, and I'm out on a hike in some rocky country just outside Grand Teton National Park. We are in the habitat of one of the most elusive and one of the most adorable animals in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the pika. So where do we go to see pikas in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? Well, any big pile of rocks at high elevation will often do, but what's more important is that temperature. I would not look for pikas at anything over 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Have you ever been hiking in Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Park and heard something that sounded maybe like someone blowing on a party favor hidden deep in the rocks, a little meep sound? Maybe you catch a glimpse of an ashy gray animal running across the rock pile, and that would possibly be the pika. This is some excellent pika habitat right here. What makes this such good pika habitat is the pile of rocks behind me. This one happened during a landslide. You'll also see them up canyon walls and in the high country and above the tree line. Wherever there's piles of rocks, you might find pikas here at higher elevations. They need these piles of rocks to elude predators. They're pretty skilled at darting in and out of the paths they know so well. And also to store those hay piles they need to survive the winter. The average pika weighs about 5-6 ounces. That puts it at about the weight of a baseball. And they're about the size of a baseball too, maybe a softball for the bigger ones. Pikas look like a little furry rodent that you might find in a pet store, maybe a chinchilla, a guinea pig, but they're actually closely related to rabbits. They're in the lagomorph family. Other animals you might see in rock piles like these would be the golden mantle ground squirrel, the marmot, a much larger furry critter out here, and we have a couple of varieties of chipmunks as well. All of those animals hibernate for the winter except for the pika. Now, when you've got a place with its winters as long as ours, 6-7 months in the high country, that can be a big problem if you are trying to live off the land and you're covered with 6 feet of snow. So pikas deal with our long, snowy winters by gathering big piles of hay, which they cure out in the sun to stash underneath the rocks to use during the winter. Pikas spend half their lives in the darkness in these rock piles under deep layers of snow, eating the hay that they had stored over the summer. That makes them one of the busiest animals here during our short snow-free months, trying to gather enough to survive. So we're starting to get a little bit worried about these beautiful but very sensitive animals. We're experiencing hotter and drier weather across the last couple of decades across the American West than we used to, and that's posing several survival threats to the pika. Hotter summer day temperatures keep pikas indoors for longer, meaning they can't be out there gathering the hay they need to survive the winter. It's also changing the type of vegetation they have access to, as we're seeing snow melt out earlier and the pattern of plants alter across the ecosystem. Across some populations, such as the Great Basin population, pikas are retreating from lower elevation areas, some by around 1,000 feet. The problem is, retreating to higher elevation areas, you eventually run out of room to go. Pikas are being monitored here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem to see if they're doing the same thing. Interestingly enough, there are some pikas that have been able to survive at low elevation in places like Craters of the Moon National Monument, where they use cool lava tubes to escape the heat of the 100-degree days that are found out there in the summer. Multi-day tours are often when we have time to stake out these pikas and try to be able to film them and take pictures of them. They're definitely an elusive species, but boy, they're worth it. Aren't they adorable? This is Sarah Ernst with EcoTour Adventures signing off.
Thanks very much to Sarah Ernst and her amazing footage of pika from that video. We have shown you some videos from all over this year. Sarah and Tyler actually are headed up north this coming weekend. They're starting off wolf breeding season in the northern range of Yellowstone. So your assignment, Tyler, while you're up there with your guests, is to get lots and lots of great wolf footage during breeding season. So hopefully we have some fun things to show you guys for February and also for March. Wolf season, breeding season is sort of January, February. So we may have 2 good wolf videos, maybe one in February, one in March for you guys over the coming months as we kind of get amped up for one of my favorite times.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I actually got a new camera, so
okay.
I'm excited to try it out in the field.
Yeah, and Tyler will be spending a lot of time via snow coach in the interior of Yellowstone as well. So hopefully some really cool stuff going on in the interior. So, okay, you got an assignment.
I am so excited. I haven't been in the
jealous.
interior in over a year during the winter, and it is magical. It's beautiful. So I'm super excited. Hopefully I can capture some cool stuff to show you guys later.
Yeah, it should be really fun. So in the meantime, guys, we are going to do our trivia questions next, and then we're here to answer your questions live. So if you have a question for a naturalist, wildlife biologist, anything you want to talk about, controversial, non-controversial, fun, serious, I don't know, whatever you want to ask, go ahead and ask us in the comment section. We're here to answer your questions.
And questions from all ages, too.
Oh, yeah. We love questions from the old, the young, whatever you want to ask us. We, generally speaking, will see what we can do and get you some answers. If you are watching this broadcast later and you still have questions, you can always ask them in the comment section as well. We do keep an eye on this video for a couple weeks, and we make sure we try to answer those as we can. Special thanks to Kelsey in our comment section today, who also is one of our EcoTour Adventures guides and has just become our brand new social media manager.
Super exciting.
Which is super, super exciting. This position Tyler just stepped down from. So we can concentrate a little bit more in the field. So everybody give a big congratulations to Kelsey on that really fun
She's going to do great. I am so excited to see what she does with it.
Not to worry, Tyler will still be here for Wildlife Wednesday. You're not going to lose seeing him there. But all right, so it is time, of course, for our trivia question of the month. What we're going to do is we're going to show you our last trivia question, and then we're going to show you this month's trivia question. The way this works is if you answer correctly in the comment section, you get a chance to win a gift card from our EcoTour Adventures gift shop. Kelsey's going to post a link to that in just a minute. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Our item of the month at the gift shop is our EcoTour Adventures coffee mugs, which we worked up with our local artist Nicole Gayton to make these really, really cool coffee mugs. So if you like the look of this and you think you might want one of those, feel free to check it out at that link. We've got all sorts of cool stuff in that store. Lots of really great books about the Great Yellowstone ecosystem, local art, craft, stuff made by guides, pillows, books, all sorts of things. So definitely check all that out. And of course, if you've enjoyed this program and you want to support the guides, you can make a donation to the website there to support the benefits of the guides on staff. So obviously we are more than happy to offer this free of charge to everybody on Facebook. We just love showing all the cool things we're seeing. But we are so grateful to the folks who have donated over the last year. We just had another very generous donation roll in today to help support the guides who make these videos, which I was just very touched by. And it's really neat to see all of that when you guys do that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead. We'll get to the trivia question. All right, Trivia Master.
Awesome. So the last trivia question we asked was way back in October.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Can you believe that it's been that long since we've seen you guys? But we're super happy to be back here. I'm just going to remind everyone what that trivia question was. How long does it take for antlers to regrow? And this was definitely an interesting one. We got lots of great answers on this. So everyone take a quick look, see what you think it was. All right. And so the answer is B. So thank you everyone for giving your best guesses on that. That was a little bit of a tricky one.
Yeah,
I believe even some guides were stumped on that one,
We may have asked one that was a little tough. The answers were all over the map. We did already give out the gift card to answer that question. So feel free to answer in the comment section on that one. But we have a winner already for that one. If you all remember back in October, it was a while ago, Tyler actually brought an antler with him.
I did. I actually brought my an entire elk head with the antlers attached.
Which was pretty cool. So we could talk a little bit more about that. So that was pretty darn fun. All right, this month, if
Yeah.
you want to win, you got to answer in the comment section. But you got to answer in the comment section on the Eco Tour Adventures page. There's been some confusion about this in the past. If this has been shared or reposted, we can't always see your comments, particularly if it's shared to something private that we're not part of. So you have to answer on the Eco Tour Adventures page. Are you ready?
All right, let's do this month's trivia question. We're asking this question about another one of our herbivores we see out on tour. All right, so this month we're asking about bighorn sheep, which is an animal we see all the time during the winter. What is the biggest threat to bighorn sheep on the elk refuge? The winter is a really tough time for a lot of our herbivores, and there are many different things that can threaten them. And so I want to see what you guys think is the biggest danger for our local bighorn sheep herd here on the National Elk Refuge and also in the Tetons. So definitely answer in the comment section below and see what you think. And thank you to Bo, who provided that video of the bighorn sheep. I love the video because it shows a male, a female, and a lamb. Yeah. And so I'm glad to use that for the question. Next month, I'm going, after we have some great answers from our audience for this question, I want to talk a little bit about bighorn sheep because
who doesn't love bighorn sheep?
Yeah, and we think their conservation is really important. Yeah. Obviously because we go see them.
We feel like our local Teton herd really is the Teton segment of our herd is really struggling, and we would love to spread awareness and information about that. And what you guys can do as individuals to support bighorn sheep, because there's some very simple things that can be done. So pretty darn awesome. Okay, it's time for my favorite part of the program, which is the question and answer. So if you have a question for me, or obviously Tyler, because he usually has all the answers.
We balance each other.
Particularly if it's a bird question, it's going to be him.
If it's history, it's Tenley. Or like local news, ask Tenley.
But if you see us looking down, it's because we've got our iPad here where we're actually looking at your questions live as they come in. But we apologize for looking down. But we'll do them sort of in the order that they were received here. Let's see here. Let's sort of get started here. All right, Mark, you said, when we saw you last, there was talk about Halloween events locally. What did both of you, your team, and the community do to celebrate that fun time of year?
Oh,
Mark,
my God.
That's such a great question. God, I love Halloween. Do you love Halloween?
Halloween is so much fun.
Yeah.
It's the perfect time.
Yeah.
I think it's the perfect time.
And Tyler and I live just down the street from each other, so we're sort of in the same neighborhood. Which is a pretty popular neighborhood for Halloween. Well, let's see. There's a lot of really fun local events that were really, really, really fun. But of course, I have a 3-year-old, so I think the highlight for me was that she finally figured Halloween out a little bit. For those of you guys who are familiar with my little 3-year-old, my mother makes the most amazing Halloween costumes on the planet. And as a kid, I got to ask for anything I wanted, and she'd make it by hand. She's finally getting old enough. She has her own opinion about what she wants for Halloween. So I got to pick her first couple years of costumes because she couldn't talk yet. So she was $3.99. She was Grizzly $3.99 one year.
So great.
Which was just amazing. She was a raccoon one year.
I will say the $3.99 photos, I was around for that, are adorable.
Yeah, we
They're
might have
so
to put those
cute.
up at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cute, like claws and all. Anyway, the point of all of this, my mother is amazing with these Halloween costumes. Alta said that she wanted to be a snow leopard for Halloween. And I think she was the only snow leopard in Teton County. So that was really, really fun. So yeah, I mostly spent Halloween with my family doing that. Did you do anything for fun for Halloween besides trick-or-treaters?
What did I do for Halloween? I was actually in Colorado for Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on my way to Arizona because it was the off season, and so I was on vacation. But I did get to see all of the festivities down south, and I mean, had a fun time. I actually think I was camping for Halloween.
Oh, well, that's kind of an interesting choice. That would either be really
creepy
or really cool.
Now that I'm thinking back, I'm like, was that a smart choice?
But you could freak out people.
All the horror movies.
You dress up like a Yeti or something and spook people on Halloween. As for Eco Tour Adventures, we do a very special tour on Halloween. We do a Death in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks tour. So we have 2 guides that are great lovers, as I am, of a book that we do sell on our website, and I highly recommend. It's called Death in Yellowstone.
Yes.
It's by Lee Whittlesley, one of the park historians. And it sounds incredibly morbid because it is, but it is morbid, but like in a fascinating way, I guess, which is nothing aside from the folks who have passed away in the park. But it's all the various ways that people either incredibly stupidly or incredibly tragically, depending on the circumstances, have met their end in the world's first national park. And what we do is, in this specific Death in Yellowstone tour, we go through Grand Teton and Yellowstone and talk about all these great morbid tales of, dogs jumping into hot springs and ghosts at Old Faithful and all sorts of really fun stuff. So if you ever have the chance to be in the valley around Halloween, and you get a chance to go out with some of our guides who are most obsessed with all the grisly tales of Yellowstone on our Death in Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and Yellowstone tour, you definitely should check it out. It's really fun.
Now that I think about it, I feel like I tell one story from that book almost every single tour. Because
I don't
it's
know.
so relevant.
It really is.
Yeah.
And people are always very fascinated by all the things that have happened.
You're seeing the things that these people have encountered, like, right in front of you. You have to talk about it.
Well, and my favorite are these, like, old 1880s ladies in petticoats being like, I'll just go swim in that warm pool, which is boiling. Like,
that one was pretty awful. That was awful.
Like
no.
Boiling. Wouldn't you notice it was boiling before you jumped in your petticoats? Like, what? Anyway, neither here nor there. Thanks very much. That was super fun. Let's see here. This is a good one. Any tips for distinguishing between chipmunks and ground squirrels? Christine, that's a great question.
That's a great question. Can I take this one?
Yeah.
All right. So here in Grand Teton and Yellowstone, we have a couple different species of chipmunk and a couple different species of ground squirrels. And they do look pretty similar. The Uinta ground squirrels are the ones that are easy to tell apart. They have no markings on their body. They look like miniature prairie dogs. But when it comes to the golden mantled ground squirrels, they look exactly like chipmunks and can be super hard to tell apart. And so the best way to tell them apart is by size. Those golden mantled ground squirrels are going to be about 3 times the size of our chipmunks. And we do have 3 different types of chipmunks, and they are almost impossible to tell them apart. So when we're on tour, we usually just say chipmunk because they almost indistinguishable. But you can distinguish them from those golden mantled ground squirrels. We don't see the golden mantles very often. They're kind of rare. I actually see them around Old Faithful in the middle of the summer. Another distinguishing characteristic is they have a shorter tail, and they don't have that stripe through the eye. They do have the stripes on the torso and the body that the chipmunks have, but not through the eye. And so that's the best way to tell them apart. They're also a lot slower. They don't scurry around as much. The chipmunks are hyper. They run all over the place. They never stop moving. The ground squirrels will sit and sun themselves and relax a little bit. As with all the creatures, I see this probably the most. Never feed the chipmunks or ground squirrels in Yellowstone. They are wild animals just like the bears and just like the elk and bison, and so we don't want to feed them. I see people feed chipmunks and ground squirrels all summer long, and it seems harmless. Those animals can carry diseases like the plague, and they can also bite you, especially those young little kids. And so be super careful around any wild animal, no matter how small they are.
It's really tragic. They become very food aggressive. There was a situation in the Grand Canyon a couple of years ago where they had to exterminate all the chipmunks on the South Rim at all the major turnouts because they were biting people so often that the decision was made to just sort of do a clean sweep. They have discussed having to do that in Yellowstone where particularly aggressive ones are living, which is just too bad because if people weren't feeding them, they wouldn't be biting people. Now, that's not to say if you go to Yellowstone, you're going to get bit by a chipmunk. That's to say if you go to Yellowstone and attempt to feed a chipmunk, it might become aggressive and bite you, so you could avoid that by not feeding it to begin with. I will say, the one thing my guests always say to me is that our least chipmunks, which are the smallest chipmunks, are so much smaller than what they're used to. That can be helpful too. That's another sort of like dead giveaway.
Yeah, and if you're back east, you do get a different species of chipmunk called the eastern chipmunk. They're a little bigger, but you don't have any of those golden mantled ground squirrels. So if you're back east and you see a chipmunk, it's probably a chipmunk.
Yeah. And if you went to the University of Minnesota and you love golden mantled ground squirrels, because that is their mascot, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
Then you can root for them and go to Old Faithful and see them. But for honestly, the least chipmunks are way cuter in my personal opinion. So great question there.
I almost got attacked by a golden mantled ground squirrel once.
What?
I was hiking Lone Peak and I did it by myself and I got to the very top of it and there was a couple other people, we were all hanging out, and I literally had like 2 golden mantled ground squirrels climb on top of me and I wasn't prepared. They like came around and were looking for food. And they literally climbed onto my lap, and I had to like shoo them away.
I had a pika chew on my rope while I was climbing one time in Grand Teton, and he like gnawed on it for like 2 seconds.
Were you rock climbing?
Yeah, I threw my hat at him, and he stopped. Yeah, my husband was on belay, and he couldn't reach. It was over. And long story short, he then started chewing on my hat.
Better than your rope.
Yeah, but then I had chew marks all over my hat.
That's true.
But yeah, I was a little shocked. I was like, that's a very habituated pika. Yeah. But yeah, neither here nor there. Let's see here. Vicky, I love this one. We're booked with you for May. Hooray! Woo. Should I rent a long range lens for Yellowstone before we get there? I have a Nikon, however, I prefer a long range for my iPhone 14 Pro Max. Your thought? Vicky, this is a great question. So I struggle a little bit to give an answer because it really depends on who you are and where your passions lie. We use this really great piece of equipment with our spotting scopes called a phone scope. What it basically does is it hooks your phone, well, it hooks the guide's phone because it's specific to phone models onto the scope to get videos. And a lot of the videos you see on Wildlife Wednesday are taken through phone scopes through our Swarovski spotting scopes.
Actually, I think the vast majority of them, I think very, very few of them are actually shot with big cameras. Most of it is through our phones. Yeah. So a lot of people find that is perfectly sufficient to get the footage of their dreams. But if you are somebody who is a dedicated photographer, there's nothing more frustrating going to Yellowstone and not having the length of lens you need. So it really depends. If you're somebody who has a passion for taking photography, absolutely you want to rent a long lens. Yes. If you're somebody who just really wants to see animals up close and would like to have pictures to share on social media, you're going to get so much footage that you're going to be able to share. That's just not an issue at all. So yeah, there are a lot of online lens rental companies where you can rent lenses. They'll deliver them right to your hotel. They usually come in like an OtterBox. You can ship them straight back. It's really, really easy to do. It's super convenient. I definitely recommend shipping it to where you're planning on going rather than taking it on the airplane, because why take the extra risk? Exactly. It's efficient, it's easy, it's quick, all sorts of different companies that do it. And yeah, as for the size of lens, if you're looking for something that's going to get you the vast majority of what you'd want, I'd say a telephoto lens that's a 1:400 or a 1:500 is definitely going to give you the vast majority. If you want to go nuts and get yourself something bigger, absolutely, you could get all the way up to an 800 if you wanted to, but those get to be really annoying and difficult to carry around. You're not going to hike with that. Versus like a 400 you probably would. I would say maybe don't go over anything over a 600 just because it's going to be super clunky and hard to move around. Sometimes these animals are in thick foliage and you need to be quick, and it's harder with a big lens. And so I would say don't go over 600, but I would say like 100 to 600 would be a great range. And I mean, I carry my camera every single tour. I also use the phone scope. If I was just traveling to Yellowstone, I would rent a camera, just because you're not always super close to the animals. Or lens. Yeah, you're not super close to the animals, and we don't want to walk up to them. Right. Yeah. So the thing is, so most of the guides, if you want to know what the guides are doing, they're carrying their camera on tour. They've got their telephoto lens hooked up at all times because it's much easier to compose a landscape by changing lenses later. If an animal, like an elk being chased by a wolf, runs out in the middle of it, you want to have your long lens on and ready. I tell all my guests, just keep it in auto mode. You can always go to aperture priority. You can always go to manual. You can always make all these alterations later, but get the shot and then start sort of thinking harder about how you want to format and how you want to design the shot and how you want to interpret the landscape that you're looking at. First and foremost, get the shot. And so, the vast majority of guides are carrying either a 1:400 or 1:500 lens on their camera at all times. And then they might switch to a landscape if they need it, if that's helpful. And then part 2 of that question, because I saw another one here, it says, also, do we purchase a video from you on tour? Absolutely not. We're taking these videos for you as part of the tour, and we will provide them to you as part of the tour. There's no additional costs. We don't nickel and dime, folks. That's just kind of disingenuous. So, the guide will take video for you, take photos for you, also teach you how to do it on your own phone. Some folks would rather have the guide do it and send them perfect video. Some people would like to say, I took this. So depending on your preference, we can certainly accommodate either way. And if you are passionate about photography, make sure as you're making a reservation, you let us know. We'll get you a guide who is a professional photographer and has the same passions. And so that can be a little bit more fun for sure. Yeah, I give photos and videos to people on tour all the time. The phones make it pretty easy because you don't have to download anything to the computer. You can do it right there if you have an iPhone, or we can send it to you in some sort of different file format right then and there. Yeah, pretty easy and pretty simple.
I was just excited to see this. Ryan Kempfer, who is one of our summer seasonal guides, who isn't with us right now. He is home in Colorado. Just said you guys are amazing. Ryan, we think you're amazing too. We love you and we miss you and we hope we see you soon. That's super fun that he tuned in.
Thanks for tuning in, Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we miss you guys. And then okay, we've got sort of a complicated one here, which I'm gonna wax poetic, I think, on. So what to do about the elk refuge? It sounds like it's time to do something. What is the easiest and fastest thing to do? Lee, that is a really, really complicated question that you're asking. So what to do about the elk refuge? Boy, I could take that in a lot of different directions. For those of you guys who are not familiar with our local federal landscapes and our local controversies in politics, what we do around here is we argue about animals for fun, basically.
Basically, we do that all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, even 5 out of 7 days of the week, the front page of the paper is some controversy about wildlife locally. Because we live, in an incredibly important wilderness. The elk refuge is a really, really complicated landscape. The best way to describe this very shortly, because you could go on, and there are whole books written on the subject, is elk didn't migrate in Jackson Hole in the winter. Elk didn't live here in Jackson Hole in the winter. They migrated. And when homesteaders first came to the landscape and started growing hay, they basically blocked the elk route south. And so elk stopped migrating. And as you guys saw in that elk refuge video, if you were tuning in earlier, there were a series of starvation events that basically created a impetus on the East Coast for Congress to do something to save the elk. And they created the National Elk Refuge as a place for elk to live in the winter. Great. The problem is elk were never probably meant to live here in the winter. So there's a wonderful book on the subject by the former biologist for the elk refuge. The title of it just is perfect for me. And the name of this book that sort of describes the whole system is Imperfect Pasture. That's what the National Elk Refuge is. It is an imperfect pasture for wildlife. We're doing the best we can with the landscapes we have left. They are inherently imperfect. And because they're imperfect and they're not the way that wildlife was originally evolved and built to be in this landscape, there are problems and controversies and issues that arise, both in terms of conflict with people, but also in terms of animals and how they live on the landscape. The problems are far-reaching. Everything from bighorn sheep suffering from infectious pneumonia to elk suffering from chronic wasting disease and brucellosis and close quarters, giving them things like hoof rot and necrotic stomatitis, to the fact that elk have basically grazed the refuge down like goats to the ground, which keeps other ungulate species and other species from being able to thrive on that landscape. And remember, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which manages the National Elk Refuge, is in charge of all wildlife, not just one specific species, to the idea of where bison belong on the refuge and how to best manage bison and what the future of bison looks like, particularly on the refuge, to how do we deal with migratory birds when there's nowhere for them to go because there's no trees because the elk have eaten them all, to why are trumpeter swan populations in decline throughout the West, and the last stronghold is the elk refuge and they're in decline there too, and what do we do about it so we don't lose one of our most beautiful birds on the planet, to how do we manage other endangered species on the landscape when, once again, elk are very hard on the landscape, to how do we manage growing numbers of people visiting that landscape and having an impact, to how do we manage people harvesting elk antlers in the spring and shed hunting, which is a sustainable practice, but needs to be done in a way that doesn't cause harm to wildlife in winter range.
It's
incredibly
so much stuff. Complex. Yeah.
Should we feed the elk? How much should we feed the elk? When should we feed the elk? Why should we feed the elk? Should we hunt on the elk refuge? Should we not hunt on the elk refuge? What's the right number of elk? What's the wrong number of elk? There's so many questions. And so what do we do about the elk refuge? Boy, I don't know what we do about the elk refuge. I'm not sure anybody knows what we do with the elk refuge, other than we do the best we can with what we have. And the history of the elk refuge is a long, long history of federal wildlife managers doing the best they can with the conditions as they're allowed, and to do what they can for wildlife while not causing great damage to local people and cultures and landscapes and the economic systems. And there are no easy answers, and there's no simple way to solve all of this.
Yeah.
So I think my children's children will still be going, what do we do about the elk refuge? This isn't going away. But yeah, it opens up some great questions. So definitely check out that elk refuge video from earlier in the program if that's of interest. I encourage you to come out on tour and visit the elk refuge with us yourselves and make up your own mind about what you think should be done with the elk refuge. I don't think there's any right answers or wrong answers. I think, like many things, the truth is probably in the middle.
I think it's super complex. I mean,
Yeah.
like there's not going to be, I feel like, one right answer in this scenario.
No.
And one answer that benefits some species, like maybe it benefits the elk or the bison, is not going to benefit another species.
Right.
And so it's a little bit of a give and take right now on the elk refuge. And it is super complex. One thing that is pretty amazing is that our community, regardless of your background, is super invested in its wildlife. And that's why it's so controversial. And it makes living in Jackson pretty special. And also visiting Jackson because we're such a wildlife-centered community. And the elk refuge is a really big part of that. It's something that we talk about a lot on our winter tours. We spend almost more time on the elk refuge or looking at the elk refuge than we do in the national park because that's where all the animals are.
A lot of the wildlife is there. Just to give you an idea how entwined the elk refuge is with town, Tyler and I are broadcasting this from Jackson, Wyoming right now. The elk refuge is 2 blocks away.
Yeah, it's really
2 blocks
close.
away from where we are standing.
I could walk and be there in less than 10 minutes.
I don't think it would take 10.
I don't think it would take 10. And I could look through a fence and see thousands of elk.
Yeah, they're just sitting
it is
there.
At our doorstep. The only thing that's keeping those elk from coming into town is a wildlife fence, which would be pretty insane if those elk could move through.
The only thing that's keeping the elk from standing on the highway outside of town is a wildlife fence. So we live so close to wilderness here in Jackson that we are intrinsically linked to it. And aren't we glad that people feel so passionate that we can all disagree sometimes vehemently, sometimes aggressively about the best way to manage that landscape for the greatest benefit, which is tough for sure. So, okay, that was really fun. Let's see. Do we have any other kind of questions here? Let's see. Oh man, lots of good questions to see, lots of good answers to the trivia question. I think we hit all the major ones. If we missed you by accident, we'll be sure to answer in the comment section. But I think we've just got about all of them.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for the January 2022 January 2023.
It's 2023 now. What?
I've been writing, like documents and dating
to
them all.
Tenley's credit, she has been working like nonstop for through the New Year's, and so forgive her for being for that element of yes.
Seriously though, I've been does anybody do this in the beginning of the year where you always have the wrong year when you're titling documents and check some things? Yeah, I still think it's 2022. I can't keep it straight. Anyway, I hope everyone has a wonderful new year. Wish everybody Tyler luck as he heads up to the Northern Range for a couple weeks. And hopefully you guys get lots of good footage.
I'm
and
so excited.
We will see you all next month. Thank you as always for joining us and for a wonderful 2022.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Yep.